Oshvazod, Odvari. How's everybody doing? Welcome to the weekly world building stream. Yeah, okay, it looks like I've unmuted myself, which is my consistent nemesis. Welcome. We had a week off last week, and we are back this week with another world building stream. We are working on designing my my upcoming dwarven campaign, hopefully podcasted campaign called Helm and Crown. And yeah, we're gonna do, I think, a very exciting stream today. I'm looking forward to this one. So for the past couple of these streams, I was gonna say past couple of weeks, we've been kind of on and off lately. We have designed Truethrone kind of piece by piece. Truethrone is a massive super dungeon that kind of sits at the center of my upcoming campaign. It was once the dwarven capital that has since fallen into ruin, and it's very big and very complicated. You can kind of see over here on the map, this way over here on the map, all the different levels to it. It's got different chambers and different areas. So we've been kind of painstakingly designing it level by level by level by level. And now this week, finally, we're going to kind of figure out what happens to this place. So in our design, we've been kind of assuming like this is what Truethrone was like when it was operating at its normal peak capacity, right? But now we're going to kind of break it down. There's a 500-year period where it basically sits, I wouldn't say empty, but it sort of falls into ruin. So a little bit of background. The campaign, excuse me, is set in a location called Khûm, which is kind of my homeland of the dwarves in this upcoming setting, this upcoming campaign I'm going to be running. It's the entire campaign is set there, and the idea is that for 2,000 years, Khûm was this prosperous, glorious motherland of the dwarves, where they sort of produced endless wonders and were churning out a limitless supply of precious minerals and built these incredible fortresses and monuments and things for 2,000 years. And then one year, sort of this cascade of terrible events happens, called the Seven Sorrows, which I don't think anyone in the year 2020 could possibly relate to. But anyway, the point being that these Seven Sorrows all kind of stack one on top of each other and end up resulting in driving the dwarves from Khûm. The volcano in the center of Khûm explodes, and it brings on an endless winter, and the frost giant raiders that attack during the winter are emboldened by this and establish a foothold. White dragons are summoned in. The king, most notably the king of the dwarves at that time, a dwarven craftsman named King Khûm, sort of loses his mind, has been kind of steadily losing his mind over the course of his reign. He starts to hoard his iron taxes, and that's what sort of draws in these dragons. There are horrible monsters that boil up from the Underdark called troglodytes. And on top of that, the veins that the dwarves have always kind of traditionally mined slowly start to dry up. So all 7 of these sorrows kind of pile on top of the kingdom, and that causes the dwarven people ultimately to flee Khûm in like a vast exodus. But Truethrone is kind of a microcosm of that disaster. And the idea is that it's this super dungeon that the characters in the campaign. So the campaign is then about dwarves coming back 500 years later after Khûm has fallen to ruin and endless winter and everything, coming back and trying to reclaim their sort of ancestral homeland. So the notion here is that Truethrone then becomes the super dungeon at the center of that. It's all these different dwarven clans who are trying to claim the kingship, because the royal clan, the True Silvers, no longer hold power anymore. They disappeared at the beginning of the end of the Sorrows. And so Truethrone then becomes the centerpiece, as all these different dwarven clans, namely our adventurers, are trying to clear out and find secrets, and particularly discover the secret of what might have happened to the dwarven vault. That the King Khûm basically disappeared with the royal family into some hidden treasury, some hidden place. They basically vanished with all of the taxes he'd been hoarding for however long. So whatever dwarf can get their hands on that can make a very strong claim towards seizing the throne. But so what we've been doing is we've been developing Truethrone, sort of physically, and going down through its 7 layers and talking about all the different echelons of it, and where the mining is done and where the making is done and where the dwarves live and things like that. So this week we're going to take all of that knowledge. As you can kind of see, I'm scrolling through it here. I'm almost done. I got up through the mines, which I have yet to name, but there are 7 levels, from the guest city on the top all the way down to the throne level on the bottom, which has yet to be named as well. You can kind of see here in our graphic how it breaks down. So we sort of painstakingly developed each level and all the different features you can find on that level. But today what we're going to do is we're going to try to break down what happened over the course of that 500 years to the people of Truethrone who were trapped inside. Because importantly, when the king fled Truethrone, he dropped the bridges that basically span across over to the place, trapping the 10,000 some residents of Truethrone inside the city, and sort of cooking them right in a pressure cooker over the next 500 years. So while we wait for more people to kind of trickle into the chat, I will do a quick overview of the various levels of the of Truethrone. Really quickly, we'll kind of go through the 7 different levels and talk about what you can find there. So at the very top, we have the guest city. Truethrone is constructed inside a hollowed-out mountain. It gets its name from the seat that sits at the very peak of the mountain, where the king, or the sovereign, I should say, will once a year sit a vigil. Fast and the Furious outside. There they go. Will once a year sit a vigil on that throne to look out over their whole kingdom. But below that sits the guest city. which is an open area of Khûm. There are 7 or 6 smaller mountains that encircle Truethrone, and there are bridges that span across those mountains to the guest city. Big, great open doors. Those bridges are used by the different dwarven clans to approach Truethrone. And the guest city at the top is sort of welcome to all, not only to dwarves, but to any foreign visitors or ambassadors or whatever. So it's full of inns, and it's full of kind of like guild halls and things like that. It's a big bustling metropolis up there. It's Fast and the Furious, everybody. It's Sunday night. It's time to stream. Here comes all the traffic in the universe. So I apologize. You're going to hear this ambulance roll by here. But then beneath that, beneath the guest city, there is a layer called the Trove. And the Trove is basically like it has a vault. It has the High Vault, which contains the dwarven taxes. But it also has a number of museums and libraries. It's kind of like the center of the bureaucracy of the kingdom is all done up there in the Trove. That's that second layer underneath the triangular guest city, as you can see on the map. In addition, it's also the center of the Peer Congress, which is kind of the legislative body of Khûm. It's the sort of checks and balances on the sovereign's power. They have a great chamber called the Chamber of Measures, where they vote on their various different policies. And then descending from there, the floor of the Chamber of Measures is made of a transparent crystal, so they can gaze down into the great central area, which is called, here I should be scrolling down and showing you these, which is called the Grand Commons. And this is a vast metropolis. It's got kind of skyscrapers that jut up from the bottom level, but they also kind of shoot out from the sides. And the Grand Commons is where all of Clan Truesilver dwells. It's the single largest section of the stronghold. There's tons of people there. Oh yeah, that's a good question UberQ asked. I think we should, that something should address as to why the dwarves trapped inside could not just mine out after 500 years. You'd think that would have happened, and I think it probably did. I think we will get to that. But that's a good question, UberQ, and welcome. The Grand Commons is where all the dwarves live. There are, great sort of dining halls and lots of guest quarters, and it's this kind of big dwarven metropolis. On either side of the columns, kind of in like a donut shape around the Grand Commons, are the Silver Works, and the Silver Works are kind of the manufacturing level of Truethrone, right? This is where all of the goods, either from raw ore to weapons to jewels and fine crafts, are all made in kind of these rings around these sort of the donut hole shaped commons in the middle, which again you can see here. These are our Grand Commons are kind of on either side. Sorry, the Grand Commons in the middle and the Silverworks are on either side. Immediately below the Grand Commons is the Bastion, which is kind of a final defense, almost like a fallout shelter for the dwarves to retreat to in times of chaos and emergency. It's very rarely used, but it is extremely difficult to penetrate, and it has enough magical supplies and things to keep the dwarves alive for basically an indefinite amount of time if they have to flee back to it. And that, I feel like, will feature prominently in this adventure, or in this world building stream. Below that, it kind of opens up into a vast empty space, and there is a massive stalactite that is sort of the central hub, the depot of the mining that Truethrone does. So Truethrone sits on a huge deposit of mithril, and basically that stalactite, and again, this 300-foot tall stalactite is the kind of central hub of that mining operation. But then there are bridges that lead out to all kinds of mines that sort of like burrow through the nearby mountainsides, again, as you can kind of see on our diagram how that works. Mine carts come through there, and water comes through there, and all the ore and stuff is refined there in the mine level, which I have yet to name, but something cool. Imagine a cool name for the mines. And then below the mines, we see there's a big, vast, open space, kind of like comically massive, almost kind of in the same size as the Grand Commons. But rather than having, 10,000 dwarves living there, there's just one family. That's where the royal family is sort of seated, like deep in darkness, far beneath all the sort of grand splendor of Truethrone. The big notable feature down here is that the place was founded based on a big, massive chunk of adamant, which is kind of the unobtainium of dwarven society. It is the only metal that the dwarves don't know how to shape or how to work. They found like a huge deposit of it. It kind of vaguely, if you look at it from a certain angle, looks a little bit like a throne. And so they basically built the entire rest of the capital around this one spot. And down here in the deepest depths is where the sovereign lives and rules, with all kind of the rest of their clan on top of them. Great, so that's kind of your overview of the different levels. Last thing we'll do before we dive into the sort of creative elements, we're going to talk a little bit about what we know about the Seven Sorrows and how the Seven Sorrows affected Truethrone, and then we can kind of talk about sort of, I like the idea of breaking it down century by century, like what happened in the first 100 years, what happened in the second 100 years, what happened in the third 100 years, that kind of a thing, right? Great, so let's see. So what we know so far is that King Khûm, called Khûm the Crazed, brought shame and disgrace upon Clan Truesilver. Not only did he hoard the iron tax, but rumors abounded of the dark things done in his name deep in the bowels of Truethrone. In this sort of like last years of his reign, there was a cult sort of dedicated to Khûm as sort of a godhead figure. They believed him to be the reincarnation of the dwarven god of creation, Umbor. So I can imagine we can maybe get into some spooky stuff deeper down in the hold as to how they might have, how these cultists might have spread or worshipped him, or if the cults turned against him in this time. That'll be interesting to delve into. But King Khûm famously hoarded all these taxes, which attracted these white dragons. Adjacent to Truethrone, there is a stone stronghold called Stone Sister, which is the kind of Helm's Deep style defensive bastion that the dwarves fall back to in times of, chaos. You have the bastion, which is deep down beneath, but Stone Silver is much more of an offensive fortress meant to be besieged. The bastion is kind of your last-ditch panic room, if you will. But the dragons, basically, the timeline on it goes that Khûm was worried that someone was pilfering from his iron tax. He was basically hoarding it in the event of needing to create some huge, incredible marvel that Umbor showed him in a dream. And he'd been hoarding it and hoarding it and hoarding it for years and not spending it, which is very antithetical to kind of dwarven values. And he, so paranoid and crazed, believed that someone was going to try to steal some of this, or that the clerks were siphoning away some of his hoarded taxes. And so he attempted to move them into Stone Silver because he trusted the Crown Guard, the army that protects Stone Sister, more than he trusted the clerks. And in the process of transfer, these white dragons, a pair of them, attacked Truethrone. It was this great, tremendous battle. They kind of threw themselves against Stone Sister in this big, epic clash. In the process, one of the dragons was killed and fell to its death. The other one managed to escape and fly away and kind of lick its wounds. As the story goes currently, when the remaining dragon returned, they found the royal family and all of their wealth vanished. Basically, the Crown Guard no longer defended Stone Sister. The dragon burrowed down into the bottom of it and found nothing, right? They found no treasure down there. The question kind of remains, where did the king vanish to? Where did the gold go? It's unknown at this time. What's more, when the royal family vanished with their wealth, the idea we had on a previous stream was that they collapsed the 5 bridges and sort of trapped the populace inside Truethrone. And then 500 years pass. So that's, again, kind of the broad strokes. There are probably little fiddly bits we can talk about. I have a short list here of some various threats that we can kind of address, things that might have happened in this time. I'm going to put down Uberq's idea about tunneling, because I think that's interesting, and I definitely don't think it means that all the dwarves were trapped. I feel like a decent number of them could have escaped. Tunnels is an idea we can talk about. So the threats, obviously, we have the dragon. The 2 dragons that initially attacked, only one of them survived. Her name is Urazzanoth. I'll make sure that you guys can see that before I get too deep into this. Yeah, you can see it, okay. Scroll it up just a little bit. Yeah, that's better. So Urazzanoth is the mother dragon that survived. They were a mated pair that survived the initial attack. Upon discovering the missing treasure, she laid her eggs inside the trove and fell into slumber. The way dragons work in Khûm, or in Khûm, in my world and on Dune, is that once female dragons lay their eggs, they basically fall into a torpor for 1 to 500 years, enough time to give their eggs the chance to kind of grow and mature, and then eventually become sort of competitors, right? That gives her children a chance to potentially threaten her position, right? Enough to defend themselves, and then she wakes back up. Because if that wasn't the case, if she just sort of slept, just long enough for them to hatch, then or maybe even to become full-blown dragons, that this much more powerful dragon would instantly wipe them out. So the idea is to give the young a fighting chance to survive against their mother. So I think the way that this times out is that shortly after she discovered that there's basically no treasure here, she fell asleep, and 500 years later, she's kind of starting to stir again. So we can have Urazemoth as an antagonist in the campaign. 2 of her brood survived to adulthood. I believe their names are Batharax and Basilcar. Great. They now both lair in True Silver. I kind of think that Urazemoth, the mother, slumbers in the bowels of Stone Sister, while her children fight over the higher roosts. If she's down in the bowels of the fortress, that then, depending on kind of who's in favor and who's not in favor, the other two, will kind of squabble over the next position. And I think the idea there, too, is that because, like, the royal family sort of sunk themselves deep into Stone Sister in the lowest levels of it, and then vanished, that the conventional wisdom is that there's a tunnel. There's some kind of a secret tunnel out of what was I going to say? Stone Sister, but there's no way to go down there and get it because the biggest dragon in Khûm is slumbering in that room, right? Like, that, yeah, there might be, maybe it's really obvious where they went, that they just dug a tunnel out, right? Or there's a hidden doorway or something down there, but there's no way to check without having to confront Urazemoth. So the next threat that we have here, we have the troglodytes, and I think this is a good answer to your question, UberQ, about why didn't the dwarves just tunnel their way out. Troglodytes are aberrant monsters that crawled from the cracks of Yog. Genetically designed to kill dwarves. They spread out like a plague through the tunnels and stoneways of Khûm, laying eggs, hunting prey, and exterminating everything they find. So troglodytes traditionally in D&D are kind of just like another humanoid exterminating everything they encounter. So troglodytes in D&D are just kind of like club-wielding underground lizard people, and so I've decided to go kind of back to the drawing board. They definitely are still kind of vaguely reptilian, but I think the best sort of modern, like, thematic comparison would be that of a xenomorph, right? That they have this, like, violent, horrible life cycle, and that they, like, the implication is that they are kind of consider a drink. Is my voice too scratchy? Sorry, guys, I can get some water. Is that any better? Sorry. I appreciate that, UberQ. The notion being that they like are almost genetically designed to kill dwarves. That they were just to be safe. Yeah, safer. Cool. I appreciate that, but that at some point during the Sorrows, one of the clans accidentally sort of breached the final layer of crust and permitted these troglodytes to kind of come boiling up out of the black essence, the black and green swirling chaos of Yogg. And Yogg had basically been waiting for this opportunity to flood Khûm with these horrible creatures. They begin as like beard lice that then sort of like dig into the dwarf's skin and eventually kill them, and then their corpse becomes like a fertile breeding ground for more of these lice, and they eventually mature into these horrible xenomorph style scrabbling monsters. So I think that to me is, again, they reproduce really virally, and their blood is acidic, and like all the classic xenomorph stuff. So I like the idea that troglodytes are a big problem in the tunnels around this time. So that to me could maybe potentially be the reason that the dwarves don't tunnel out. A potential reason that the dwarves don't tunnel to freedom. That, like, I could see you could maybe have groups of dwarves that leave, right? And it's implied that maybe they come back, maybe they don't, right? Like, at least from some of the tunnels, maybe you get these troglodytes kind of come back through, right? That they dig a new tunnel out, and then instead of sort of making it to, like, maybe they make it to safety, but whatever happens, more troglodytes come back down that tunnel. So I'm not opposed to some of the dwarves leaving, right, or taking off or escaping, but the question is just, how long did that take, and was it initial? Was it something that happened much later? There's other things we can do as well. Lastly, we have the Darrow here. So a Darrow is a dwarf that goes mad from Creator's Block. It's basically like a weird behavioral, almost like a virus that spreads amongst other dwarves, right? That does explain a lot as to not just exploring out. Would the warriors be depleted and the crafters are not as warlike or willing to take on the trogs? I think that's definitely a good point. Yeah, like how much military do they actually have? So there are two military bodies in the two military bodies in Truethrone. There's the Crown Guard, which defends against sort of above ground threats. And operates out of True Silver, or operates out of Stone Sister. And there's the Clan Guard, which defends against sort of subterranean threats. And operated out of the Bastion. So I definitely think that the Crown Guard is devastated by the dragons. Like that initial battle against those two ancient whites pretty much annihilates the Crown Guard. There's maybe a few of them left, but it's pretty sparse, right? Yeah, I think that's neat. Cool. So I think the question would have been the Clan Guard is probably the ones that do the war that sort of fight the war against the troglodytes. Okay, so the Darrow. The Darrow is a dwarf that's gone mad from Creator's Block. It spreads virally amongst dwarves. Any dwarf that's exposed to a Darrow risks catching it. It's something like executive dysfunction. They go mad. Desperately try to create something new or original. They pull out their beards. Hey, what's up, Jose? Thanks for coming. They make strange effigies. etc. So I think the Darrow is another good area where we can very easily explain away. Like I think we're gonna get a lot of Darrow content kind of out of Truethrone at this stage because all of these dwarves trapped together, particularly because they are like low on resources, a certain amount of Darrowism. I don't know if that's the word. That's like heroism, Darrowism. That's kind of cool. Is obvious. Like they're definitely going to be some Darrow in here. I think that's kind of like the inevitable conclusion of having these dwarves. I think the other thought I had for threats are tunnel collapse, right? Like earthquakes are common in this period. Following the volcano explosion. In this period, following the volcanic explosion, tunnels and mines especially are prone to collapse. Potentially sealing dwarves in. So, yeah, those are basically the threats that we thought of in terms of... Yes, I like that. Ooh, that's a good idea. Yeah. Like a weird Darrow, like, doctor. A Darrow doctor who tries to heal people by stitching new body parts onto them. Yeah, it's very Frankenstein, right? Onto the body parrots. Okay, boy, I can't type. Sorry, everybody. What can you guys see? Yeah, that's not bad. So let's talk a little bit about the timeline. I think that's kind of the thing I want to figure out first. So these are kind of our four obvious threats. There are probably other threats if you guys have other ideas of other things we could kind of play with. I think there's something sort of interesting about the idea of like breaking Truethrone down. If we have these like 7 layers, right? Breaking Truethrone down into like the upper layers are like sort of the home and the province of the dragons, and then the middle layers are the province of the Darrow, and the lower layers are the province of the Trogs. I kind of think that's like those are almost like the territories that are sort of owned by these different creatures, right? These different factions, kind of, right? That the Darrow don't go up or down because there's dragons above and troglodytes below. I mean, I think that as a basic structure, like timeline wise, could work. That they get sealed below by the dragon initially, and then they're kind of stuck in the middle section, right? And then they try to flee through the tunnels, and that's when the troglodytes come in. And so they basically get sealed in the Silverworks and the Commons, and they don't really have anywhere else to go, and they quickly run out of resources, and they just sort of slowly go mad and become these crazy Darrow. I think that's kind of neat. But let's talk about timeline. So we have 500 years. So we'll say 0 to 100, 100 to 200, 200 to 300, 300 to 400, 400 to 500. And then we have our different levels. So we have levels. We have the guest city. We have the Trove. We have the Silverworks. We have the Grand Commons. We have the Bastion. We have the Mine. And we have the Throne level, which also doesn't have a name yet. Okay. So initially, the dragon attacks kind of in what we're calling year 0. It has a different year, obviously, but I can extrapolate those dates later. Right. And the Crown Guard is destroyed. The dragons attack. Dragons attack the royal family and the treasury. Disappear. The crown guard is annihilated. Annihilated. The bridges are dropped, trapping the dwarven population within. So when Urazonoth returns, she discovers the treasure gone. With her ice breath, she burrows into the trove and recovers what trace amounts of treasure Khûm was unable to evacuate. Khûm was unable to evacuate. There, amid the meager hoard, she lays her eggs, then retires to Stone Sister. So, because I liked that notion of the party when they come to Truethrone, that they delve down into the trove, into the vault specifically, right? Like burrows into the high vault, I should say, high vault. That they find the like broken shells of the eggs that she lays there. It does beg the question that if the dwarves are like, basically the question is, what is the population doing at this point, right? That they have tried to flee, obviously, early on, and it didn't work. There is another way down the mountain. There's a staircase, right? We mentioned the bridges might be magical, so they could easily be raised again, or is that changed to bridges of stone without an easy fix? I think it's cool if they are broken. The bridge that leads to Stone Sister is basically like was broken, and then it fell to the bottom, but then a spell was cast on them to like basically reassemble the bridges to span them across, but reassemble that one bridge to span it across to True Silver. Span it across to Stone Sister. A lot of these names, guys. So I don't think, but I don't feel like the other ones have that, right? Like because there could be sort of a, do they find a way out? There is also the stair, the Pilgrim Stair, I think, which was Jose's idea originally, which is an immense 100,000 step staircase that winds 7 times around the mountain. Those basically, without permission to use the bridges, use the stair. So I could see there being basically like a mass evacuation attempt, right? But I feel like if the dragon is up there trying to dig its way into the high vault, that will take a while, right? I mean, so I think there has to be basically like waves of evacuation. So I think there's like first evacuation. Dwarves attempt to flee via the Pilgrim Stair. When the dragon discovers this, she attacks and kills hundreds of them, and coats the stair in ice, making them impassable. Which is cool too, because then if you're coming up, right, like if the party wants to go to Truethrone, you're gonna have to negotiate these like frozen stairs, right? There's maybe bits of it that work, but and they can you can have dwarves that are like flash frozen. Yeah, there are flash frozen dwarves in the ice that, if thawed, could be talked to, right? That's really interesting. Could be interrogated about what happened. Yeah, and exactly right, Uberq. They'd be very vulnerable on the stairs. So I think maybe some of them get away, right? That it's, again, I'm fine with like the 10,000, however, dwarves being kind of slowly winnowed down to maybe there's only 1,000 or so left or that survived. But they're kind of just like being picked off. So I think one of the cool sides to be, yeah, as they go up the stairs, you're finding these dwarves that are like encrusted to the mountainside or to the stairs or frozen in these blocks of ice that Razanoth just like carpeted them with ice. I also think then that like that's the first evacuation and it kind of goes disastrously. So I feel like I like the notion. My question would be like, who sort of takes authority, right? Like who, if the king is gone, right? I feel like the peer congress would essentially try to assert its authority in this time. So let's say politics. In the absence of the sovereign, the peer congress made from whatever masters escaped the dragon's wrath attempts to bring order to the frightened populace. So again, I like, you could get this interesting thing where they like, I like the idea of over 500 years having these like rising and falling systems of government almost, right? Like I think there's like a period where basically it's maybe that's the last 100 years where there hasn't been anyone there. Like I kind of think that's interesting. Like basically abandonment. Like for 100 years there've been no active dwarves in Truethrone. And you know, we can mess with that. That might not necessarily be exactly true. I think that like I like the idea of defining each century with like a term. I think the first century is panic, right? Like for 100 years, the dwarves struggle and retreat and evacuate, right? They're trying to escape. I think after this 100 years, they kind of realize that they can't get out, right? There's no safe way out. So in the absence of the sovereign, the peer congress, made from whatever masters escaped the dragon's wrath, attempted to bring order to the frightened populace. They are fractious and ineffectual, with too many voices, too much chaos, too much like boy, what's the term for that? Like ceremony, right? That like they're still kind of trying to prop up the old institutions that even though everything has gone to shit, they don't really acknowledge that, right? That they can't. I think about a century, 2 or 3, the religious cults start to fight for power and a return of the true ruler prophecy. I think that's cool, yeah. The other idea I had is that you could politically also still have the clan guard, who are the other military force, the ones that are based deeper in Truethrone. So the idea of like a conflict between like a kind of democratic Republican Congress versus a sort of authoritarian military sort of dictatorship, right? That like that there are probably emergency procedures that they're supposed to take, and that the peer congress like doesn't for whatever reason, and that the clan guard is sort of upset about that. So I think the congress is one faction here. Maybe that might be it, UberQ. It might be that like we start with these two kind of like secular factions, like the Congress and the like the clan guard, right? There are deliberate emergency procedures in place for just such an occasion. And the clan guard wants to enact them, almost kind of a martial law sort of a thing, right? They get intense resistance from the Peer Congress, but some members of the dwarves agree. But some members of the dwarves agree with the clan guard. This is an emergency. This like drastic times or desperate times call for desperate measures, kind of a thing, right? So you have this like immediate. Oh, no worries, Christopher. Welcome. How did you like the new episode of Mando? I thought it was okay. It was kind of like a very it felt kind of like a theme park ride, you know, not necessarily bad, but just kind of like silly, goofy fun. We're talking about the Descent of Dwarven Society, Christopher. So yeah, what I was gonna say, UberQ, was I like that idea of these two secular factions, the Congress and the Clan Guard, initially like, you know, having somewhat reasonable objections, but that as the time goes on, they become religious sects, right? That it becomes less about what should we do and more about like the right way, you know, like that it starts in this very practical place and then it ends up in this very esoteric place. It kind of gets Mad Maxed way out to become these like scary cults devoted to these two different ideals. I think that's kind of neat. So that's cool. I think there's a second evacuation, right? A second attempted evacuation. Second evacuation. Yeah, I thought that was cool too, Christopher, that like he's kind of out of the scene for like 10 minutes, which I thought was interesting. My one beef was that like I guess I don't want to spoil Mandalorian. I think I'm tired of them just like, here, you watch the kid, like the child being like basically placed in a safe spot the entire episode. It feels like if you're gonna do that, then what's the point? Like the child is like Mando's vulnerability, so just like having him go, here, you go to this completely safe spot every time. This now happened twice in a row, and I'm like, but the point is that that's his weakness. I don't know. I would like to see the child be like a little bit more threatened, I guess. Okay, so second evacuation. When fleeing from the upper exits fails. Yeah, thanks, Christopher. I agree. The dwarves attempt to flee from the lower exits, right? They try to tunnel out through mines and warrens in the mine level. Yeah, okay. However, they are confronted with troglodytes that come bubbling up from fissures in the earth. So I think, yeah, the clan guard rushes to battle them. And I think you get kind of a Gondor-Mordor conflict here where the clan guard is able to, for the most part, hold the troglodytes off, right? That, like, because they have to come through these narrow tunnels, and the dwarves, like, the clan guard have basically been trained to do this for a really long time. They're not used to fighting trogs necessarily, but they are used to fighting in these close quarters, and it's like their terrain. You know, they can collapse tunnels, they can do all kinds of, they have traps, and they have all sorts of stuff in these mines that the clan guard is able to hold off the trogs reasonably effectively, at least in the beginning, right? But obviously they're losing soldiers and things like that, so they're kind of recruiting from the populace to resupply themselves, right? They manage to, for the most part, hold the troglodytes at bay. Troglodytes at bay in the tunnels, but it's a slow and egregious war of attrition. I think what you could even do, UberQ, to like answer your previous question is that like once one of the tunnels is blocked, produces troglodytes, right? the clan guard seals the rest of them. Right, like they claim that they will scout. They will scout the remaining tunnels and find a safe way onto the mountainside, right? Out of Truethrone. But they can't just have any old dwarves go in there because of the risk of infection. Once they learn about the mites, right, it's like, I think you get this kind of like pandemic paranoia thing, right? Like only the clan guard are permitted in the tunnels. Permitted in the lower tunnels. I think that's cool because it sets you up, right, to then have this this sort of scary, paranoid, like the clan guard. It's sort of eventually revealed that the clan guard hasn't been looking for a way out, right? That you can put some scary military junta style position in place where they realize, you know what, there is no escape. It's like a classic zombie movie thing, right? Like it becomes this mini kingdom. Like think of 28 Days Later, right, where they yes, Christopher. So we talked about this a little bit. The troglodytes reproduce by their larval form are these like beard mites, these like lice that get into the dwarves' beard and then kind of like attach to their skin and slowly drain them of strength, turning their body eventually into basically a nursery for the growing troglodyte. That's kind of how they spread. They're basically genetically engineered to be a threat to dwarves. But then you can use that as justification for the clan guard to get really draconian and really tyrannical about their procedures, right? And you get some of the dwarves that feel that way, and some of them that are trying to like maintain this old system. And neither faction is really like correct. The Congress is kind of in denial about how serious it is, whereas the clan guard is like taking it too seriously, right? They're too draconian, they're too immediately tyrannical. Yeah, that's cool. I like that division. So I kind of think that sort of like encompasses the first 100 years of Truethrone, right? That like there's this divide, but they're able to yeah, exactly. Might still act along trusted or not by political hierarchy issues. Right, exactly. That like they're still kind of trying to pretend, especially the sort of the congressional dwarves are still sort of trying to pretend like the hierarchy still matters and all this stuff when obviously, you know, things are deteriorating at this rapid pace. So I think that they are able to kind of exist in this space for a time, right? For about 100 years. I think that's kind of the definition of that time. They're still sort of living their normal-ish lives. They still have, you know, a decent amount of raw materials, so they're still kind of making stuff. I like the idea of like, maybe it's actually this. Maybe instead of panic, maybe it's denial. Right? The dwarves attempt to live their lives as normal. Oh, you could do panic first and then denial. But I think maybe denial, again, if you're looking at the stages of grief, right? Like, oh, could we... Oh, guys, what if we do that? What if we tie these to the stages of grief? So it's denial, and then it's anger, right? And then it's bargaining, and then it's depression, and then it's acceptance. Yeah. So anger is kind of like I think anger is sort of like the panic stage, right? Like something happens, troglodytes, you know, breach the protocols, or the dragons do something, right? Like that shakes everything up. I think this is like civil war, right? An armed conflict between the dwarves that bubbles, or that in the dwarven factions. The congressional dwarves. You think it's more interesting to invert them, Jose? To do panic first and then denial? The congressional dwarves are more in number, fearing the draconian clan guard. But the clan guard are better organized. And more militaristic, and therefore destined to triumph. What do we think that like initial thing is? Like what is it? What's the spark that kind of drives these two factions into actual conflict with each other, right? Because again, this is they're dwarves, so they're like sense of time is a little bit weird, right? Like 100 years seems huge to us, right? Like think about that. It's like half of the country's history. 100 years ago was like 1900 or 1920, excuse me. You know, was the flapper years, and they've been in this one city for 100 years. They're dwarves, so again, their sense of timing is a little bit different, but there has to be something that really shakes them up and really like throws everything into stark relief. There's still the Darrow we haven't dealt with, but I feel like once that starts, you know, I think that it's kind of like a nuclear event. Like once they kind of first discover a Darrow, maybe this is a leveling power of lower houses to show that they can rule with more numbers, as they would have been overlooked for higher houses have been dwindled first. Yeah, I think it's kind of a tragedy of the commons thing, right? Like it's about how many. I like the idea that functionally the old way the Congress has to lose, right? Because if you want to have sort of a scary repressive regime, I mean, yeah, I don't think they can fight for 100 years. So I think that ultimately the clan guard triumphs. Clan guard wins and installs a scary dictatorial ruler over the imprisoned population. You know, you could envision graffiti about them, or like, you know, obviously I don't know if they would have like tapestries, that might be too much, but you could see, you know, colors painted on doors to show like who's loyal and who's not loyal, you know, that kind of like scary totalitarian type stuff. Everyone is conscripted into the clan guard and forced to work shifts to defend the tunnels, burning eggs, and pushing back the troglodyte incursions wherever they pop up. I kind of think that rather than the big something happening, rather than it being like a troglodyte thing, or even really a dragon thing, I kind of like the idea that it's like a disaster. You know, what if like in the Grand Commons, I think it's called the Deep Sun. So the Grand Commons is like the big it's the big the metropolitan area, right? The big like living quarters. And this was Jose's idea back in the day. There's an enormous illuminite crystal that hovers in the middle of the chamber. I wonder if like something happens where it basically crashes to the ground, right, and shatters everywhere, and you know, damages a bunch of buildings and a bunch of people die, and it's like seen as either, you know, sabotage or, you know, neglect or whatever, especially if like the first stage is denial and the dwarves are kind of trying to just like
like ride it out, right? That like eventually, you know, the dragons will go away, they'll get bored, they'll do whatever. They're kind of trying to just persist, and their sun, like their literal, this is the thing that we look at every day to remind us that the world is normal, comes crashing down. And that kind of is what heralds in this sort of second era. I think that's kind of cool. And then there's all this like suspicion about, was it sabotage, was it not? The deep sun plummets from the sky and crashes into the city below. It's a huge disaster. Oh, 1 second, I'm gonna sneeze. Excuse me. It's a huge disaster that kills hundreds, kills dozens maybe. Oh, you want to involve a judge? Oh. But yeah, I feel like starting with anger, it's tough to me to go from anger to denial. You know? I like the idea of the judges getting involved, though, Jose. I think that's cool. I'm trying to think, like, how would you... Because, yeah, there's, like, crimes and stuff being committed here. You know? Yeah, that's really fascinating. Let me get this down. That kills dozens and throws, like, basically shatters their conception of their own normalcy. Let me finish this thought, and then I'm going to come back to the judges, because that's a fascinating question that I had not considered at all. This disaster causes the clan guard to impose harsh martial sanctions. They blame, like, insurrectionists, or, you know, like, seditionists on the attack. Or they blame the attack on... for the attack. And demand for everyone's safety that they relocate to the bastion. Right? And the idea is that there they can be watched and they can be protected, and it's a lot like... But they're obviously under the thumb of the clan guard. The Congress pushes back on this. Yeah, that's fine. The Congress pushes back on this. The congressional dwarves. I can't type. Dwarves push back on this. The masters are arrested, and it immediately leads to an armed conflict. Yeah, okay, we'll come back to that. I want to talk about Jose's idea about these judges. So, that's an interesting image of the judge dying, but again, it feels like they would have to be released from their oath, right? So, for those of you who don't know, the judges in Khûm, it's funny how much, like, individual world building we've done at this point, that half of these streams are me like, okay, so here's how dwarven cooking works, right? I have to, like, explain this thing. But it's good to think about that. It's good to, like, cross-pollinate these ideas. So the judges are basically this supernatural judiciary that like sort of reigns over Khûm. The idea is that rather than having there be mortals that do it, a long time ago, these 7 thanes swore to uphold the sort of 7 dwarven laws that are basically like the 10 commandments, right? They're called the words in stone, and they are these like inviolable laws that the dwarves enforce. And these judges are these undead, basically like animated suits of armor that whenever one of these 7 laws is violated, show up at the place in Khûm and prosecute the person who did it. So they are not bribable. They are not, corruptible. They are not human. They just supernaturally know when a crime is committed, and they just arrive there to sort of enforce the law. So what's interesting is this idea of like, do the judges show up? Because I mean, I feel like we're breaking a lot of these laws all over the place. Like one of them is like, a dwarf shall never like bring harm to another member of their clan, like things like that, right? Like, so if these dwarves are fighting each other like in the streets, why don't the judges get involved? Like, they could, but it feels to me like, you know, Jose, maybe that's it. So what, is this the first clan war? Is this the first time that dwarves en masse in the clan have turned on each other? I kind of think that's interesting, because what if it's like a bandwidth problem, right? So like, imagine, you know, if I commit a crime, the judge has to physically come out and prosecute it. And there's seven judges, and each judge is tied to one of the different laws, right? So there's like a judge for arson, and there's a judge. That's a good question, UberQ, and I will address that one. We haven't thought about this one before. That a judge, you know, is about arson, a judge is about this, and a judge is about that, or whatever. One of them is the judge about harming other members of your clan. But if that happens, if a dwarf commits murder against another dwarf, then the judge has to physically go there. They do it magically or whatever. They go there and they have to prosecute this thing. Imagine if every day there are dozens of these cases that, like, it's just too much strain for the judge to handle. And so they like, I like that it isn't like a big, like, prophetic, like, magical thing. It's just like a sheer bandwidth problem, right? That basically, like, causes the judge to lock up or to basically, you know, destroy itself or whatever, right? Like, that's so interesting. Does the number judge essentially shut down too much like intra-clan violence that it can't process all the cases and it explodes or whatever, right? Like it's something. It basically ceases to function. It shuts down. I think that's really cool. And then it kind of like, what I love about that too is that then that means that, you know, when the characters in the campaign 500 years later, you know, break one of these laws, one of the judges will show up, but not that one. That judge is out of commission. There's only 6 functioning judges right now. Dude, that is so good. Ooh, they crack? Yeah, that's cool. And it cracks. Maybe you could go to the barrow and find it, but I think that's really neat, Jose. Very cool. Let me answer UberQ's question. So one of the laws is no dwarf shall heap high gold without a plan, and it's meant to, again, be to prevent them from hoarding. That's one of their sort of antithetical behaviors. But the notion there is that Khûm has a plan. Khûm was visited in his dream by Umbor, is what he claims, and that he is planning to build some incredible masterwork, but no one knows what it is. So it's technically like a loophole. Like, he gets out of it because he doesn't actually hoard it for no reason. The law, that's so fascinating about the words in stone, is that they were written, you know, however, 2,000 years ago, longer than that, and they are imperfect. Like, there are legal loopholes in there, and because the dwarves are so stubborn, they refuse to, like, revise it or add more laws or cover their ass, right? So there are, like, big gaps in dwarven, like, culture and economy that have these holes that can easily be exploited. Financial crimes in particular is a huge one, right? Stuff like that. So that's another good example of it, where the Khûm gets to kind of like worm his way out because he technically has a plan. And we're talking very, very literalist, kind of originalist dwarves, right, that only believe that the law applies in the exact spirit of the way it was originally written. And again, even the dwarves don't get to, like, make those decisions. The judges who wrote them down, it would be like if the founding fathers were still alive as ghosts, and whenever the, like, Constitution got brought up, they would reappear and spectrally, like, interpret it. That's kind of what we're talking about, right? Okay, that's cool. So the dwarves turn on each other, and they kind of begin this internecine conflict. The Congressionalists are eventually defeated. Ooh, that's cool. Uber Q. The first gargoyle could be a Darrow trying to reinstate the broken judge or more judges. Yeah. What happens to its armor? Did the Darrow get it? Did Darrow find it? Do the players find it? Yeah, that's really cool. Because I was wondering, how do you like make that relevant? You know, if it just like happens back at the barrow, but maybe it happens here. It happens in Truethrone. Yeah, that's cool. Okay. So ultimately, the Clan Guard wins and installs a scary dictatorial ruler. Everyone is relocated to the Bastion, where they can be watched over. Everyone is conscripted into the Clan Guard and forced to work shifts to defend the tunnels, burning eggs and pushing back the troglodyte incursions wherever they pop up. A small minority of congressional rebels remains in the upper halls. Oh, sorry guys, there's the ambulance again. Fighting a losing guerrilla war against the entrenched Clan Guard. So there's still kind of like flare-ups like that. Yeah, that's really cool. The dwarves clash in bloody civil war. Yeah, I dig it. Okay, bargaining. So bargaining, I think, is a good place for the cult stuff to arise. You know, because I like the idea there's still being two factions. One of them is sort of in control, and the other one is kind of on the fringes. But what do we think these two cults are? So I think one of them has to be some version of Umbor Reborn. So the cult of Umbor Reborn is a sort of late in Khûmish history cult that's centered around Khûm. For the like 80% of Khûm's reign, he was a Fast and Furious EMT edition. For the first 80% of his reign, he was this like glorious leader that had kind of taken Khûm out of a period of like bad rulership and bad management and kind of darkness, and had brought in this shining new era of creativity and innovation. He brought mining back when mining was, for complicated reasons, kind of on the outs among the dwarves. He was seen as this great unifier, this great leader. And then, of course, in the last 20% of his reign, he sort of starts to go mad and, kind of spoils all of his reputation. So, but during that sort of glory period, Khûm was thought of as being this perfect, almost deific leader, kind of like almost like an Egyptian pharaoh, right? The idea was that they thought that because he was this creative soul, he visited all the other clans and he helped them redesign their holds and had all these wonders. People thought of him as being Umbor, the god of creation, reborn. I think it was the kind of thing that was largely practiced here in Truethrone anyway. Maybe it had a little bit of a following in other places, but it was definitely a heresy, and it was definitely like not widely accepted all the way across Khûm. So I think some weird iteration of that is cool here. They would have to obviously adapt it because Khûm is not there. Maybe they do like a body double thing where there's like a fake Khûm. Maybe, the sort of military leader of the Clan Guard claims to be descended from Khûm. I think it's something like that, but like cults, like religious cults, begin to arise in the Clan Guard. Some permutation of the Umbor Reborn faith. I'm thinking about these rebels, right? These like guerrilla warriors that are like fighting in the upper levels of Truethrone. Because we still don't have any Darrow, right? And I think we're like approaching Darrow territory now, Darrowtory, if you will. And I'm trying to think like where they come from. What's kind of the sparkle? The thing with Darrow is that like they don't necessarily have like an obvious origin. You'll certainly have like a patient zero, but it's something that could kind of happen to anybody. Oh, there's the EMTs again, right? Like it's not like, oh, I did this thing and it made me a Darrow. It's like it just kind of happens to you. It's as innocent as writer's block, but to dwarves that's so destructive that it kind of can wipe out whole civilizations. So I'm kind of thinking that like it might be interesting if the guerrillas who are fighting in the upper levels are denied access to the materials and therefore can't create and therefore sort of become Darrow, right? Like as a result, that they sort of begin this period as these, you know, these ragtag, scrappy militia that are trying to fight the clan guard and, you know, damage them and get into the bastion and free the people, but that's where the Darrowism starts, right? Does the Darrowism start amongst the formerly congressional dwarven rebels? Denied access to the mines, to the lower silver works. Are they unable to create and thus slowly become Darrow? Because then I think the next phase, the 300 to 400, the depression phase, I think can be kind of the like the period of Darrow, right? The sort of madness period. I think that's kind of interesting. So what happens with these cults, right? So they install this dictatorial leader down there, right? And they, oh no, guys. Okay, so the dictatorship, yeah, and you're exactly right, UberQ. All they have to do is capture one of these guys, right? And it infects the whole. Yep, bingo. Right? It's just a matter of time. Once one of these dwarves gets it, then it gets to everybody. Yeah. And so I think there's a period in the Depression era where they're all Darrow, right? Like every dwarf in this. There's not a dwarf left in Truethrone by the time the characters get there that isn't a Darrow. The dictatorship takes on a increasingly more religious aspect, maybe less Umbor reborn and more Ignon reborn. So Ignon is the goddess of the earth, and she's like she's the wife of Umbor, and she's kind of a Gaia-esque figure, right? Like she represents the earth itself. She like gave her sentience and she gave her life to create on Dune. So because they're so low down in the earth, the idea that I had was maybe you do a spooky thing where if they're a cult, you know, there's 100 years of them doing weird cult practices, you know, and fighting the rebels. But do they start to worship the Trogs? Right? So in speaking about the way that troglodytes are bred to kill dwarves, the idea is that they're the initial like egg sacs for the mites look like gems. They look like green, like sort of appealing gemstones. So the notion is that like a dwarf will go and try to hack it out of the stone and it will burst and the mites will get all over them and into their beard. So is there a cult belief that like they're actually good and that Ignon sent these things and like Ignon made everything, right? Do the cultists begin to intentionally infect themselves with troglodytes? I mean, that seems like it would like wipe them out pretty quickly. So it would have to be like in some kind of a controlled way. In some manner of controlled way. Right? Like they find some way to infect themselves with the trog, like with the beard mites without killing them or, you know, doing something like that. But the notion that like basically the whisperings of Yogg slowly start to drive them crazy. That you have these like two competing madnesses, the Darrow and the, sort of the troglodyte worship, right? And they're still kind of at loggerheads. Yeah, the lack of materials. And I think that's a big part of it, right? That Ignon could be mad and needs appeasing for the return of workable stock. Yes, very good, UberQ. I like that. They believe Ignon is upset with them, punishing them for their sins. Yeah, I think having a kind of like masochistic, like almost like a flagellating, we deserve this, we deserve the pain and the like torment of these troglodytes. This is like the scourge of Ignon kind of a thing. The troglodytes are punishment, are divine punishment for their crimes, and they deserve, and the pain they inflict is good, actually. Infecting themselves would quickly wipe out the population. So how do they maintain for 100 years, right? Like, how does that work? Something, they find some way that, like, by studying it or by kind of playing with it. Like, and I like that idea too, that like they're smart enough to, they're dwarves, right? They're smart enough to find out, okay, we've been fighting these troglodytes for 300 years now. We found a way to basically play symbiote with them, right? Ooh, oh my god, what if they're like horrible dwarf troglodyte symbiote creatures that they fight down there? Oh my god, yeah. They find some way to coexist with the troglodyte larva, creating horrible dwarven symbiotes. I think it's like an upper tier thing, right? They're like only the inner circle of the cult is allowed to do that. And it's like an ascension thing. Like, I will bear the pain of our failure, and if you are inducted into the mysteries, right? Only the inner circle of the cult is permitted to attain this enlightenment. Enduring the pain of their sins for everyone, for the whole clan. But what that means is that you could argue that they would start intentionally like growing the eggs down there. They would start growing eggs intentionally, fostering new troglodytes and sending them out into Truethrone, yes, but also into broader Khûm. The idea that like they get down there when the adventurers reach this level, reach the lower levels. Nope, sorry, thank you. Thank you, UberQ. When the adventurers reach the lower levels, they find farms of troglodyte eggs, tended by horrific dwarven trog symbiotes, like hybrids, right? Like dwarves that have intentionally infected themselves and mutated to basically no longer register as dwarves to the troglodytes, right? Like they register as other troglodytes and they're kind of just like tended and grown. That is horrifying to me. Yuck. So let's talk about the Darrow, right? I think that the Darrow are kind of growing up in the upper chambers, right? I like the idea of, I think Alan a long time ago had this notion of like a Darrow court in the Congress of, in the Peer Congress, right? Because that was the whole conceit. Like babbling meaninglessly. They The Darrow. Oh, let's do this. Let's go. Let's copy that idea we had before that you had Uberq. All it takes is one Darrow to be captured and contained, captured and detained in the Bastion for the Darrowism to spread amongst all the remaining dwarves. Ugh. I think that's pretty good for that period, right? Like, obviously there's lots of other little stuff we can play with, but I think that's neat. I would love to figure out a way to... This is kind of a side point. I think we can get to it when we talk about the throne. Yeah, we'll see. We'll get there. We'll see if we can wrap up these two. We have about 40 minutes left. I think we can at least get through the end of these two to 500, and then I can go on my own and I can specifically go through and design these things. I want to make a small detour and talk about the throne. I really like the idea that the throne level is untouched. I think from a narrative perspective, it's more interesting if the party goes down there and discovers like exactly the state that Khûm left it in. So maybe there's just something simple where the pillar that connects, like the staircase that connects the tip of the stalactite to the throne is broken. And so nobody could really go down there, and that basically the entire throne level has been sort of left to its own devices. That way, I like it as a weird museum to Khûm's sort of madness. Okay, so bargaining is like religious mania. Spreads through the dwarves. Okay, Darrowism grips Truethrone. So I guess my question here is that, like, if we assume that the Darrow, that by taking a Darrow prisoner, it's just a matter of time before it kind of spreads through all the remaining population. There's some echelon of the dwarves that I think are symbiote enough. They're like troglodyte enough. They are not affected by the Darrowism. They're not enough of a dwarf anymore, right? It's the kill me scene, right? In oh yeah, that's cool. Part of the natural disaster that was part or caused the light crystal shattering. Yeah, cool. Cut off from the rest of Truethrone by a natural disaster. The staircase broke, and the stalactite. Yeah, that's cool. So if I think there's like a portion of the cult is troglodyte enough that they are not affected by the Darrowism. When it spreads amongst them, right? Once everybody is infected, do they just let them go? Do they loose them back up into the city? I think that kind of makes sense, you know? Yeah, I think that they, like, when the symbiotes, when the cult realizes that the rest of the dwarven population is lost, they loose them back into the Grand Commons. So my question, like, and basically seal themselves below and seal themselves below. Like, every once in a while, they'll capture a Darrow. They'll hunt and catch a Darrow. And catch a Darrow to use as a breeding stock, or like as a, it's a breeding bed for more mites, or to or hunt for sport, right? Or simply just for sport. So they loose all the Darrow kind of back up into the Grand Commons, into the city, right? And it kind of becomes this like crazy Darrow city. Like, what do we think that that's like? I mean, I feel like what kind of a crazy society do the Darrow construct with no, no other outside influence? Again, it has a very Time Machine, like Morlocks and Eloi kind of a thing, right? Where it's these like almost two species now. The dwarves are either these scary troglodyte infected symbiotes, or they're these cackling, mad, deranged dwarves. What manner of society do the Darrow create? A Darrow king. Yeah, this kind of interesting place. There's a crazy version of Carouge, right? Like a Darrow declares themselves like Carouge the Second or whatever, and attempts to rule. I think it has like an almost Alice in Wonderland, like kind of crazy, absurdist, this absurdist kingdom. It's like a little bit, Arkham Asylum, a little bit Animaniacs, right? Like this kind of wacky, deranged, upside down, topsy-turvy kind of place. I'm trying to think like what sort of stuff they would encounter there, right? Like they don't know how to build, they don't have any resources to build. They're just sort of taking things apart and putting them back together again, right? Like they construct a new Darrow city, in the bombed out, the Supreme Darrow bureaucrat, in the bombed out ruins of the Grand Commons. There are a number of fires and disasters in the forges and furnaces under the Darrow's watch. Everything essentially goes to shit. We talked about the idea that the fire suppression system is enabled on One Ring, and this means it has no oxygen. Yeah, the fire suppression system in Truethrone, the idea is that rather than like spraying water down there, they basically can magically pull all the air out of that level. So I think there's like one ring of the Silver Works that has no oxygen in it, right? You can't breathe. I like the idea that you said, Jose, about the like they enact a crazy, meaningless bureaucracy with all kinds of titles and duties and offices that mean nothing and have no purview. Yeah, they deconstruct the city and reconstruct it in kind of a crazy Rube Goldberg way. They deconstruct everything they find and reconstruct it in a crazy Rube Goldberg fashion that makes no sense to anyone. So here's an interesting kind of problem we have with the Darrow, is that that was 200 years before the campaign. It's a sort of 300 to 400 period is 200 years before the campaign begins. The Darrow cannot have children. So dwarves, like creating, like basically giving birth to a child is the sort of like the big thing that dwarves do. That's like their big final creation. So my question is like, if they can't have any children, then what's the, like, are they all dead by now? Are there any Darrow left at this time? I think there obviously have to be. They have to encounter some Darrow in there. And I like the idea of there being this Darrow court. So they could be like the younger generation of dwarves who, well, wait a minute. What if the Darrow don't die? So, okay. What if Darrow don't die? So, dwarves are a little weird in their, the Trugs could breed them, that's true, for their needs. Well, yeah, but they can't breed because they can't have children. So, Darrow are sterile because they, like... Hey, welcome, Vaughn. Awesome, thanks for coming. We're talking about Darrow, so it's perfect for you to join. Follow me on this. So the way that the dwarves work, with their like lifespan, is that they live usually in the neighborhood of like 200 to 300 years, right? But the last thing that a dwarf does before they die is they make a masterwork. They go off and they study this thing and they create it, and then once it's done, they're kind of like allowed to leave. So if the Darrow can't make anything, can they die? Because I kind of think that's more interesting. I think that the older these dwarves get, the non-Darrow dwarves, the older they get, the more sort of like single-minded and sort of absent and addle-brained they become. Like, again, kind of like an Alzheimer's thing, right? They get really focused on the one task that they have to complete. What if these Darrow... Oh, but they petrify. That's kind of interesting. What if these Darrow, like, just keep getting older and older? Like, I kind of think, like, the super long... I guess they pull their beards out. That's true. I was going to say the super long beards. But maybe the super long hair that drags down to the ground? Yeah, I mean... I'll put do they petrify. It's an interesting idea. Do they petrify? The problem with them petrifying is that then they still wouldn't basically be around. Like, the characters need to encounter Darrow when they're here, and if these are 500-year-old dwarves, right, that doesn't really make any sense. They could be younger ones, right, that were born in that time, but I think the idea of them never dying because there's like a clerical problem, they never make their masterwork, so they can't die, so they live forever. Like, obviously they can be killed, right, but they live forever and they just get madder and madder and madder with age, I think is kind of neat. Because they can't create, they get older and older. Because they can't create, they can never finish their masterwork, and thus get older and older and older, but never die of old age. They become so mad, and they retain all the single-mindedness. Yeah, exactly, right? Like, they kind of need to be a threat, They retain all the single-mindedness of an ancient dwarf. But all the madness of a Darrow. I kind of think that's cool, because then, yeah, you can encounter them, right? There's a bunch of them. I think that their numbers would be winnowed down, like you said, UberQ. Their numbers have dwindled. Perhaps only a few dozen or a few hundred remain, but they are nonetheless still going about their zany business in the belly of Truethrone. So let's talk about the last sort of epoch here, the 400 to 500. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, they just get grayer and grayer, with no complex, delicate movement. That's kind of cool. Do they petrify? Do they slowly turn grayer and grayer? Vaughn asks, have you already discussed why Darrow can't create? If not, could it be because Darrow share consciousness across individuals? They are a mix of memories from various dwarves. That's interesting. I think I'm going to leave it specifically unsolved, but your idea is backed up, I think, by a little bit of like how the Darrowism like translates, right? That like it's again, it has like this viral spread. I like the idea that they don't know how it spreads. They don't know like why it happens, because I think that the notion of defining that sort of makes it a little bit less scary. But I think it's cool to like drop hints about it. So it could be neat that like a thing that the players could kind of figure out or they could test, but I don't think it's going to ever be explicitly answered in the game, because I feel like it's scarier if it's just a thing they can't possibly understand, and then it could happen to any dwarf, right? Like that it's not something that like, oh, you genetically do this, or it's not like an actual physical condition. It's a thing that like, if you ever run out of ideas, yeah, from the gargoyle, right? Because they're like cobbled together. Yeah, that's neat. Explore the origins of Darrowism. Do they share consciousness across one another? A la the gargoyle. Okay, acceptance. So let's talk about this last phase here. So I kind of think that for the most part, Truethrone now in this period is dead. I think that there are definitely, remnants left. Obviously, they're seeing all these different things. But what is the active state of the inhabitants of Truethrone for this last 100 years? Acceptance, again, to me is sort of like almost like Oblivion, right? What's going on? My question is like, what's going on with the symbiotes down below, like the weird troglodyte mutants? They've been just kind of breeding more trogs. It's like a breeding hub, right, for more eggs. Are they still down there, just kind of like contentedly doing that? Are they have they been wiped out? Have they kind of dried up? Like, in what state do they find Truethrone when the party gets there, right? Like, what do we want to encounter? I think there are definitely still Darrow. Like, the dragons are still up there, right? The dragons are still sort of the guardians of the gate. At the gate. Small numbers of Darrow dwell in the commons, in the Grand Commons, and the Silverworks. I don't know about the troglodytes. I think it's a cool image. I think if the players don't get a chance to see that would be a bummer. So I think that like a small number of dwarven troglodyte symbiotes farm massive, or like tend massive egg farms in the mines. I kind of think we don't have to develop it too much more. I think this is the stasis. It's been like in stasis for about 100 years now. This is kind of how it works. Like, there's no more radical change. Nothing else is really moving or shaking. I think it's kind of acceptance means it's like settled into this routine, right? The kings, or the throne level is untouched, is pristine. A museum to Karuja's madness. Okay, great. We have about 20 minutes. I want to go through the different levels, and I want to write down some cool ideas for things the party could encounter on each one of these levels. They could be cosmetic things, they could be actual encounters, they could be traps, they could be any number of stuff, right? So we'll start with the guest city, and some ideas we have here. Like, it's definitely cold and covered in ice, right? It's like aesthetically what's going on. I think it's like broken from the dragon attack. The building's shattered and besieged. There's an enormous gaping hole in the middle of the floor, leading down into the high vault in the Trove. in the Trove. The pilgrim stairs are covered with ice. And frozen dwarves that could be unthawed. That could be thawed. One of the 3 dragons is usually here. Yes, I did, Vaughn. I did keep that idea. Yep, that it burrowed down into the Trove. Yeah, I kept it. I think it's cool. That's where the dragon laid its eggs. Urazonoth dug all the way down into the Trove to try to get access to the High Vault, try to get access to what piddly amount of coin was still there, and then curling up in the gold, they laid their eggs. So yeah, I kept that idea. I thought it was cool. With the ice breath, right? Like hitting the stone over and over and over again to weaken it, and then digging. Like it took them a year to dig their way down. One of the 3 dragons. That's cool, UberQ says. Would the dragon's level be something the party could take on, or would it be more of a pushing threat to get them inside? One of the 2 dragons, I should say. Let me answer that in just one second. One of the 2 dragons is usually here. The other layering in Stone Sister. So I think that depends on when they come here, right? If they approach the level at low levels, right? The dragons are a very real danger that could wipe the party, right? It could be the kind of thing, right? Wipe the party. If they approach at higher levels, they could probably take them, right? The dragons are less of a threat. No matter what level they are. So when I say dragons in this case, I'm talking about the 2 younger dragons, the 2 children of Urazonoth. No matter what level they are, the Urazonoth presents a deadly threat to them. And the idea is that, like, she's just waking up. Urazonoth is only now slowly awakening from her torpor. And as a white dragon, she's likely to be very, very hungry. I'm trying to think of some other stuff they could encounter here. Like sort of ice traps, you know, sort of slippery terrain, monsters, other things like that. Let's move on. I kind of like the idea of the guest city being sort of like obliterated and there's not a lot there. But if anybody else has any other ideas of stuff, go ahead and throw them out and we can put them in there. The Trove is kind of interesting to me because, so in the High Vault, like the High Vault has a puncture through the ceiling, The wealth is gone, and and there in the belly of the vault are a host of broken dragon eggs, hatched dragon's eggs. Yeah, mephits are kind of interesting. Ooh, that's cool, Vaughn. Yeah, when we say life, I mean, I think it's cool if they're like, like mephits and stuff, right? Like ice elementals. While in torpor, that's cool. I like that. The drag. Oh, because maybe it's even a thing where like an older dragon like that's those are defenses, right? That's to keep somebody from creeping up on her when she's asleep. Maybe she's really vulnerable in her torpor. You know, the dragon is especially vulnerable, and thus, at her old age, is powerful enough to conjure like supernatural defenses, mephits, ice elementals, maybe even like Yeti and stuff, right? That like she doesn't conjure those, but I think they're like summoned to her, right, to defend her while she slumbers. That's really cool. And it's like, it's even like with the Yeti, I like the idea that it's like meant to be, yeah, exactly, defenses and targets for the young dragons to hunt. That like the young dragons maybe, but it's also the idea that like as she gets ready to wake up, maybe she starts to summon in animals like caribou and Yeti and things, so that way when she awakens, she has food. It's like right there waiting for her. Like I like the idea that it's like the dreams of dragons, right? The dreams of dragons. Yeah, that's cool. And so that is conducive to cold-based life. Yeah, the temperature is deadly cold, especially the deeper one gets into Stone Sister. Like where her actual lair is like abysmally, like impossibly cold. I don't care if you have cold weather gear. Like we're talking deep below zero, right? The idea of like a sleeping dragon, a sleeping white dragon, an ancient white creating this like field. And I like the idea too that like they might be able to make a nature check to like discern, okay, there is a lot of wildlife around here. That must mean that she's getting ready to wake up, right? Like a preponderance of animals in that place might mean there's a dragon sleeping, right? Okay, cool. So in the trove, there's like the hatched eggs. Oh, interesting. Yeah, from while she slumbers. She's really, really deep in the castle, though, in the fortress. So I don't know that her spore would necessarily get anywhere. And I kind of think it's cooler if it's like more of a magical field and less of a like an actual natural phenomenon. Let's talk about the trove really quick because we only have a few minutes left. I want to put a dent in it. So the trove, to remind everybody, is like a it's where the Peer Congress meets. It's like the bureaucratic hub of True Silver. It's got the Chamber of Measures. It's got the High Vault. It's got the Hall of Deeds and the Hall of Plans and a bunch of other stuff like that. It's lots of offices for clerks and things originally. In our history, it doesn't really factor in hugely. It's definitely a factor in the early bit in like in the denial stage in the first 100 years when the Peer Congress is like kind of trying to like hold court there. So we could have there be evidence of Darrow in that part. I like the idea of a Darrow court. Or like, I don't think you see them yet, but there's like remnants of a Darrow Congress in the Chamber of Measures, where they voted on something insane and sort of played at running the city, right? Evidence of the final vote they made, but instead of the actual weights, the scale is heaped with like skulls or something, right? It feels like the Darrow would have plundered. Ooh, that's interesting. Yeah, would have plundered all the goodies from this level. No more magic items here. Undead or equivalent. The Darrow would have come back to the Trove to learn or reenact normal dwarven life. Well, they don't die, right? So there could still be dwarves here, or Darrow here. Are there like Page Master Darrow? Like the idea of them like rooms full of Darrow, like scribbling on parchments, making useless notes. See, my instinct here is that like rather than having there be a bunch of Darrow up here, what if it's one Darrow? You know what I mean? Like I don't mind the idea of like undead dwarves. Is kind of interesting. Ghosts, maybe? Like incorporeal undead? I kind of think, like, what if, like, one Darrow Page Master? That, like, there are only a few dozen of them left, probably, in the entire place. Resides up here. Like, filling out forms, You know what I mean? Like I think like almost having this like empty level, filling out forms, running around. Like maybe they're surrounded by gargoyles, surrounded by a posse of gargoyles. Like they've turned all the statues on this floor into gruesome gargoyle constructs. Yeah, that's right. Yep, lots of historical lore. Hidden here. Yeah, I like that he's like constantly filing the same thing. They're constantly filing and refiling the same paper or order or whatever, and then like they write the order and then like take it down the hall and then they put on the other hat and then they sign off on it and they take it, like they're in this like trapped in this endless bureaucratic loop. Because I think there's a cool like pacing thing, right? That like the dragons obviously are very dangerous and scary, and then the lower you get, there's this one page master that like kind of runs the whole level in the Trove, and he seems scary, or they seem scary enough on their own. And then you go down a level into the Grand Commons and it's full of Darrow. Like you thought one was bad, this place is overflowing with them, right? I think that's kind of cool. Lots of historical lore there. Gargoyles to fight. I like the idea of it being like a crazy kingdom that like they have to, or like a weird. There's all these like strange laws and things. Like they need, like the gargoyles demand like badges or paperwork to go places. You know, broken sorting machine or file case. Yeah, that's cool. Broken sorting machines. Yeah, they could just be like little details. It doesn't necessarily have to be like, I think that like the floors are carpeted in thousands of pieces of paper, right? Like footprints, bare dwarven footprints in ink, like leading here and there. I think is kind of neat, right? That like it's just like visual stuff. It doesn't necessarily have to be monsters or traps. Like those are obviously all good, but it's just kind of like conceptually, what do we find there? Yeah, the gargoyles are waiting for the paperwork that Darrow will never finish. That's kind of neat. I think that's cool. They are awaiting the paperwork that the Darrow will never finish. I think there are probably monsters. You can fight the gargoyles and stuff, and presumably you can fight the Darrow, but that like it's much more of a level meant to creep you out. Especially if the top level is like full of monsters and the dragon and all that stuff. It's about like stealth and getting around and avoiding like very obvious danger. This level is more eerie and less overtly threatening and more just kind of like unnerving, right? Like strange noises, weird echoes. Strange noises, weird echoes. Muttering that seems to come from everywhere. Okay. Let's maybe I might want to call it there. Yeah, the Drove is about building dread. Yes, building dread. Not threatening the characters. Yeah, that's cool. The characters. I think I might call it there. I know we have 6 minutes left, but rather than diving into the next location, I think we maybe call it. Ooh, that's cool. Murals with childlike graffiti and chalk drawings on tapestries to filing lost parts. Yeah. Ooh, chalk is cool too. Chalk drawings, strange like diagrams on the walls. I think that might be true in the Grand Commons. Actually, I like the idea of like they could be in both places, but I love the idea of like ooh, let's put that in the Silverworks. Darrow attempting to create stuff, right? To plan things. So these like the walls in there are filled with like crazy chalk drawings of these insane devices and contraptions that they're going to try to make, right? Like it's almost that like beautiful mind mathematician writing everywhere, but it's just utter nonsense, right? That's really cool. That's a very spooky feeling. Okay, cool. Well, hey, I think we did a great job doing all of the timeline stuff. I'm very happy with that. There's a little bit more work I can do on my end to kind of fill some of those things out, but I really like the notion of, I think it's a very like logical progression. Let's walk through it really quick. So after Carouge disappears and the disappears with the wealth and the Crown Guard is defeated and he drops the bridges, the dwarves initially try to evacuate Truethrone by running down the pilgrim stair, the external stairs, but the dragon sees this coming. Sorry, Fast and the Furious, everybody. Wow, what is going on? Unbelievable. But the dragon anticipates this, here's them doing it, right? And they like fly out and they carpet the staircase with ice. They catch a bunch of dwarves and they basically prevent them from fleeing that way. Meanwhile, some dwarves attempt to flee. What is going on out there? Some dwarves attempt to flee through the lower tunnels, but they are quickly encounter troglodytes, and the clan guard, the sort of military force down there, basically prevents anyone from attempting to go out through those tunnels for fear of drawing more troglodytes in. This creates an immediate conflict between the sort of upper dwarves, the congressional dwarves that want to maintain order and balance and sort of act like nothing has changed, and the clan guard who recognize that they are in a very desperate situation but want to impose sort of draconian sanctions on the dwarves to sort of keep them safe, like sort of martial law. Over the next 100 years, this bubbles out and becomes an actual civil war predicated on a disaster where the deep sun, the kind of floating illuminite crystal, crashes into the city below. What is that? I don't understand. It's never like this any other time of the week. Crazy. Crashes to the city below and causes all kinds of panic and chaos. The clan guard uses that as an excuse to try to relocate all the dwarves into the bastion. They are resisted. There are riots that eventually turn into open warfare over the next 100 years that dissolves into actual civil war between these two different factions. Ultimately, the clan guard triumphs. They are better equipped. They are better defended. They are better warriors, and they manage to basically subjugate the remaining people of the city, and they impose a sort of dictatorial rule with some sort of a figurehead. Over the next 100 years, sort of religious cults begin to spring up. These, what were sort of secular conflicts, turn into these religious ones. While most of the population is kind of like held in the bastion, a small portion of them escape and begin to fight as guerrillas up in the higher levels of the city, striking against their militarily superior foe. Meanwhile, in the Bastion, this cult, the cult of Ignon Reborn, arises that basically slowly begins to... hey, what's up, Diesel Shot? Slowly begins to introduce this sort of scary troglodyte-worshipping cult that basically is all about punishment and sin and basically making yourself a vessel for these agents of Ignon's displeasure. Meanwhile, among the Darrow, or among the rebels in the higher levels of the structure of the city, these Darrow start to rear their heads, right, and it kind of begins to spread among the people. Great, I'm glad we have one last random walker in. Meanwhile, that Darrowism spreads throughout the entire structure, and those dwarves that are still dwarf enough to be infected kind of lose their mind and construct this crazy Alice in Wonderland style kingdom in the belly of Truethrone. Meanwhile, the symbiotes continue to kind of like farm their troglodytes down below and send them out into the rest of the city. And that's kind of, or the rest of the kingdom, and that's kind of the stasis that we end up in. The Darrow never die, they just keep getting older and older and older and older. And so when the players eventually encounter them, they are these like completely insane, madness-driven, they're even crazier than your average Darrow, right? They're kind of kicked up to 11. And that's sort of the state of things that we end up in when the players encounter them. Yeah, great. Awesome. Thanks so much for all of your work, everybody. Thanks, Christopher, for answering that. We are just about to wrap up, though, Diesel Shot, so I think you have unfortunately missed most of the stream. Great. If you like this stream, you like the world building that we do here, you can go ahead and subscribe and click the subscribe button. We usually stream on Sunday nights at 6 p.m. PST, where we kind of do one topic per night. If you like me, you can follow me on Twitter at XPWebSeries. And if you really like me, you can hire me to run a D&D game for you at prodm.com. That's pro-dm.net. Excuse me, not .com. You can hire me there, or you can check me out on Twitter at XPWebSeries. Awesome. We will be back next week. Yeah, go team. You guys are awesome. Next week we'll be back. I haven't decided on the topic yet. We're kind of getting to this place with the campaign where it might be close to being ready. Like, not ready to run, but like in terms of big world building, there's not a lot left. So I kind of wonder if we transition into a new topic at some point, if we find a different part of the world to build. I don't know. That could be kind of fun. But yeah, we'll cross the bridge when we come to it. We're just sort of kind of slowly winding down on what's next. Oh, PDT. Yes, thank you, PDT. Great. So again, thanks everybody for tuning in. We will be back next Sunday at the same time. I said Ojvazod as you guys came in, so I will say the traditional dwarven farewell, and that's Kevazad, which means I'm not working. Great. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Kevazad. I'll see you next time. And let's go to the outro.
Hmm.